We honor our graduates, and especially our high school graduates. That's who I work with. If you're visiting, I'm the youth minister here. And so we honor our high school graduates, and each graduating class is different. They bring different memories, I guess you could say, for Jessica and I as we work with the teens and for our youth group. And I like to take this time sometimes to share, funny stories about each class. And this class is unique in the sense that it's a smaller class. Last year we had 8 graduating seniors, and then our current junior class, and so next year is again another large class of about 8 seniors. But this one, like I said, is 4 seniors, and it's a little bit smaller. And that's just kind of how youth ministry is sometimes. It kind of ebbs and flows. Each class, you kind of have moments where you've got big classes and then small classes, and it kind of goes back and forth like that. And neither is good or bad. They just each present different challenges for that class. For example, if you are in a large graduating class, it's easy to kind of get lost with everyone. It's easy to maybe fade off into the shadows or, sit off to the side. You might not get noticed as much. But for a smaller class, the challenge is making friends sometimes. Because in a smaller class, you may not always find someone who is exactly like you that you can relate to. And teens are like us as adults. Like tends to attract like. We like to be friends with people that are similar to us. We have maybe similar interests, similar age, and we tend to just gravitate towards people who are maybe in the same life situation, like I said, same interests, whatever it might be. We tend to gravitate towards people, and teens are no different. And sometimes for teens, 1 year can be a huge difference. 1 grade can be a huge difference, and it might be hard to go to someone who's younger than you, even if it's just by a grade, and relate to them. And this class, this graduating class, is one that I think has excelled at that. Like I said, they're a smaller class, and so they've had to cross over to maybe students that are younger than them and make friends with them if they really want to feel connected to this youth group. And I feel like this is a class that has done that, and they've approached that kind of difficulty and excelled or done really well with that. And it's not easy to cross over those walls or cross over those divisions sometimes. It's not easy to always reach out to the person who's younger or maybe different than us. And we as adults know this. We can relate to this, that it's not always easy to reach out to the person that's different or that's not like us. In fact, back in April, we had our spring retreat with the youth ministry, and our theme was crossover. And it was all about crossing over to a new life or crossing over different things. And we talked on Sunday morning about this idea of crossing over boundaries. Crossing over these walls that society puts up around different people or that we might put up around ourselves. Crossing over those boundaries to other people. And the importance and how Jesus calls us to cross over to people. That we can't stay inside our own walls. We can't stay with people who think just like us. But we have to go out into the world and share the gospel. And sometimes we have to cross over those walls or boundaries. And so I thought, with the spring retreat back in April and with this class, this idea of crossing over divisions maybe and being willing to reach out to those who are younger and be friends and really bring that unity. I thought that would be a good thing for us to talk about this morning, this idea of crossing over boundaries. And so Paul, in his letter to the church in Ephesus, that's where we're going to be if you want to be turning to Ephesians chapter 2. Paul, in his letter to the church in Ephesus, he writes to the Christians there, and he talks about a wall. The church in Ephesus was a congregation made up of Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians. meaning that they are Christians. Some have a Jewish background. They used to be Jews, and they've now converted to Christianity. Or they're a Gentile Christian, meaning that they were anything other than Jew, and they converted to Christianity. And so you've got this church with two different backgrounds coming together and worshiping the same God. And so in Ephesians chapter 2, Paul talks about these two groups, the Gentiles and the Jews, and he talks about how the two have become one. Starting in chapter 2, verse 11, Paul says, "Therefore remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised, by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands. Remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world." So he's talking about the Gentiles that, remember, you were separated from God. You were excluded from all the hope, all the promises that the covenant that God established with the nation of Israel. They were on the outside looking in. 13, he says, "But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ." The Gentiles, the ones that Jews did not associate with or worship with, the outcasts or rejects of Jewish culture, have now been brought near. And Paul continues on in verse 14, he says, "For he himself, for Christ, is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus establishing peace. And in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility." And if we look in chapter 2, verse 14, Paul says that Christ has destroyed this dividing wall of hostility. Now let's talk about this wall for a moment. Obviously, there was a metaphorical wall that divided the Jews and Gentiles. That you stay over there, I'll stay over here. We won't associate, we won't go near each other. You stay over there, and there was this metaphorical, not a literal wall that they had built up, but you stay there, I'll stay here, and we'll just go about our business. So there was the metaphorical wall, but there was also a physical wall that the Jews and Gentiles would know about, that they could think about in their mind. And that wall was at the temple. In Jerusalem, in the temple where the Jews gathered to worship, on the outside of the temple, you would have what's called the court of the Gentiles. And that's kind of where a lot of business transactions would take place. You see, the temple was a central gathering point where anyone could gather. Everyone knew about it, and so it was just kind of a meeting place for business transactions, kind of gathering of latest news, gossip, whatever that might be at the time. And it was on the outskirts of the temple. So it wasn't really in the temple, it was on the outside, and it was called the court of the Gentiles. That's the closest to the temple that Gentiles or non-Jews could get to. And at the court of the Gentiles, there was a wall dividing the court of the Gentiles from the temple. And there would be gates in order to enter into the temple. And above the gates, there would be this inscription that said, "No foreigner is to enter the temple. Anyone caught will be responsible for their own death." This idea that Gentiles, you stay out. You are not allowed to enter into our temple. You are not allowed to enter into the Jewish temple. If you know your history about Paul in Acts, he's accused of bringing Gentiles in, and that's what he gets arrested for in Acts. And so that's that issue. In fact, Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus while he's in prison for that accusation. And so this dividing wall is fresh on Paul's mind, and many of the Jews and Gentiles would know about this dividing wall. And so when Paul talks about a dividing wall of hostility, not only was there this metaphorical wall where they would not worship or fellowship together, there was also a physical wall that divided the Jews and Gentiles. But Paul says that Jesus has destroyed that wall. That now both Jews and Gentiles can come together and worship. That it's no longer just the Jews that can worship Yahweh, but Jews and Gentiles, the two groups, can come together as one and worship together. And unity, this idea, this theme of unity is all throughout Ephesians. Paul's constantly reminding the church in Ephesus that even though you've got two different backgrounds, you are all to be one. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3. Paul writes, "Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, and one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all." Did you catch it? One body, one Spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one. It's not multiples. It's not that faith and that faith, your faith, my faith, your body, my body, that congregation, that congregation. Paul writes to the Ephesians and tells them that they are one in Christ. They are to be united with each other. Unity in the church is critical. We have to be willing to cross over these boundaries or walls that divide us between people. And that's part of the message of the Good Samaritan too. Samaritans and Jews didn't get along either. But the Good Samaritan, the parable of the Good Samaritan tells of the Samaritan crossing over that boundary to serve and love the Jew. And not just serve him a little bit, but serve him in such an extreme way so that he didn't just do the bare minimum. Luke 10, verse 33, "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was injured. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you might have.'" It says, look after him, and when I return, I'll pay for whatever expense he incurs. If he orders room service the next 3 nights, I'll take care of that. If he buys that extra movie, I'll take care of it. If he wants a massage, I'll take care of that too. Any extra expense, I will reimburse you. The Good Samaritan, the Samaritan who does not associate with Jews, crossed over that boundary and said, I'll take care of it. I'll go beyond just taking care of the bare minimum. He crosses over this boundary. And all throughout our life, we're going to come across people that are different than us. And we have to cross over to them. Maybe they're a different age than us. Maybe they're younger or older, and we think, oh, they just don't understand. They don't know how it is nowadays. But we go to them and build a relationship with them. Maybe there's someone at school or at work that might just be a little different from everyone else for whatever reason. We go to them. We cross over those boundaries that say, you just stay over there. Or maybe someone comes from a different background than us, or a different kind of life completely. We cross over those boundaries and go to them. Just because someone is different from us doesn't mean we shut them out or separate ourselves from them. But maybe it's not boundaries between people that we need to cross over. Maybe there's other kind of walls in our life that we build up, or other kind of boundaries in our own personal life that we need to cross over. A fairly common verse that fits this idea is Philippians chapter 4. Paul writes to the church in Philippi while he's in prison. Chapter 4, verse 12, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Paul's facing a life difficulty here. He's in prison. He's faced other life difficulties. These are boundaries. These are walls that come up in life. Difficulties, things that inhibit us. And Paul's got these things that inhibit him. But he says that he can get over them. He can face them with Christ's help. And so as we face different things in our life that might seem like walls or boundaries that need to be crossed over, it's important that we rely on Christ. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's some kind of fear, and we've got to get over that fear in order to accomplish something. Maybe it's some kind of self-doubt. Maybe it's some kind of physical ability or lack of ability or lack of resources. You know, we build up all sorts of walls around ourselves. We tell ourselves, I'm not capable to do that. Or I'm not ready to go do that. Or there's no way I could ever do that. Where we've got all these different boundaries that we have to deal with in our life, but we rely on God and His power to climb over those boundaries and walls. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And then Psalm 18:29. I love this because I think it fits perfectly with what we're talking about. Psalm 18:29, with your help I can advance against a troop. With my God I can scale a wall. And so to our graduates, as you enter into this new stage of life, you're going to come across new difficulties. Maybe they're financial difficulties. Maybe you begin to question your abilities. Maybe you question your faith. Maybe there's relationship difficulties or conflict with another person. Our charge to you is don't let those walls be built. Cross over those walls. Rely on God and lean not on your own understanding, and cross over those boundaries. And the same is true for us as well. It's not just the graduates that need that advice, but we all come across different boundaries, different walls in our life. And it's important that we not let those boundaries hold us back from anything, but instead we should cross over those boundaries. And so maybe you're here this morning and you've got some kind of boundary that you need help with, some kind of boundary that you need strength or encouragement to cross over. Maybe you need the prayers of the congregation. Or maybe you're ready to cross over that boundary and step into a relationship with God through baptism. Ready to cross over that boundary or wall of sin. If we can help you in any way, please come now as we stand and sing.